Move on to session 2 for today. Peer review. David Waldman is the chair. He's also professor of the Graduate School of Technology Management at the University of Pretoria, and his research interests cover sustainability transitions, particularly with respect to the social systems of energy and mobility. Well, these are important issues of today. And he's the associate editor of the International Journal of Information and Technology Management. So, David, over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Tomaselli. And I have to add, it's not the middle of the night here. I'm in Riebeek West. Riebeek West, and mense weet nie wat dit is nie. People don't know where that is generally, but it's somewhere in the Western Cape. Actually, quite a beautiful place. But it's a great pleasure. Just let me check first of all, Professor Tomaselli, can you hear me okay? Is everything despite my location?
Yes, I keep unmuting myself. Yes, we can hear you perfectly. And we can see you on wonderful lighting.
Okay, excellent. So that is good. So we're ready to go. So it's my task then to chair this session. I listened to most of the previous session and it was fascinating. I particularly like that contribution of the poetry. I can't say we can match that, but we're certainly going to match the research interests. So this is a session on peer review, and we have 2 speakers. So our first speaker is Dr. Carody Wright. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Carody. Dr. Wright is at the South African Medical Research Council. She has a PhD in public health and is a chief specialist scientist at the MRC. She leads a group in climate change and health research. She's also an adjunct lecturer at University of Pretoria and a senior research associate at the University of Johannesburg. So that sounds like you are exceedingly busy. Your research focuses on environmental health in Africa with a focus on understanding climate change and health impacts to inform interventions. Dr. Wright has published more than 110 articles in accredited journals and supervises postgraduate students. And she was also the author of the Africa chapter of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC Assessment Report 6 Working Group 2 report, and a member of the WHO's Air Quality Guidelines Development Group. So Dr. Wright, over to you. I'm not sure if I have to time your input, but you've got 15 minutes. So I won't be too brusque in keeping you to time, but yeah, hopefully you will manage that easily. So, and we can see your slides. So I'm going to turn off my video and mute myself. Just let me check if your sound works before I mute myself.
Hi, it's Carody. Can you hear me?
Carody, okay.
Yes, great.
That's perfect. Yeah, we can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Super, thanks. I'm just getting rid of all the bits and pieces on the screen. Hello to everybody. I'm very grateful to be with you for this session. I joined at the end of the last one. It's fantastic to see so many people here at this event. So I'm putting across what I'd like to propose as something for editors to think about including on their website as guidance for people who are going to be your reviewers. So some websites do this, some journal websites do this, where they give advice to prospective reviewers. And this is especially helpful for young emerging career researchers who have not reviewed before. And so this presentation has been made in collaboration with early career researchers with whom I work and mentor or supervise. So I can give you some ideas on what you might include in some kind of advice you give to your reviewers. Essentially, you're aiming for a quality review, and a reviewer needs to know what to do in order to provide a quality review that will ultimately be of assistance to an editor or an associate editor in making a decision. So this is what I propose, maybe some ideas for you to use if you don't have such documents already available. If I can get the slide to move, that would be useful. There we go. All right, so first off, for a reviewer who's going to review, so you've agreed to review a manuscript for a journal. Now what? Do you just dive right in? Certainly not. I believe that you have to formulate a plan in order to make a quality reviewer report that is of use to the editor as well as for the authors. And so what are some of the things that we should consider as the reviewer assisting in this process of review for the journal when we do this? So I think as a reviewer, you have to ask yourself an important question. What is my role as a reviewer? And this is something that I would advise you have on your website. So I've broken it down into very logistical terms. You're expected to read the manuscript. You're expected to give quality, novelty of the research perspective. You're expected to provide constructive feedback. And ultimately, you're trying to provide a review report that can help inform a decision that will be made by an associate editor or editor. I believe that the review process is multi-stage, and this is how I approach the review of manuscripts. There are different ways of doing it. So this is a personal approach that I find works. You may have a different one to suggest. I think the main thing is to just give some guidance to your potential reviewers. So first of all, I usually read the entire manuscript. I'm a little bit old school. I usually do print it and make sure I invest in my carbon footprint for doing so. But I read the entire manuscript to get a sense of, does this fit the scope of the journal? What is the story? Can I tell the story? What is the quality of the manuscript like? And at this stage, I probably only hold a pencil in my hand and note some upfront thoughts as I read through on that very first read. When you're doing that very first read, these are some of the things that I particularly think about. What is the story here? Is there a story? Is there a golden thread running through the manuscript that helps me understand what the authors are trying to say? Am I enjoying reading this manuscript? At the end of the day, anybody doing countless reviews of manuscripts for a literature review needs to partially enjoy the reading. And if this is a very disconnected, disjointed, or poorly written manuscript, even though the science is good, it can become very irritating and onerous on the reader. It's going to take a lot of work to get that manuscript into a shape that's reasonable for somebody else to be able to understand and appreciate the study findings. I always ask myself, how many times do I feel agitated? And the agitated things are usually around grammar or spelling, or when they're using abbreviations that haven't been explained. And so I can't follow the thread of what they're trying to tell me. And then a very, very important one is, how many times do I ask a question of the manuscript that doesn't seem to be answered as I read more? In other words, the authors of the manuscript have held too much in their heads and have assumed that I'm reading between the lines to infer what they mean. And I can't find the answers that I'm looking for when I keep questioning something of them. So you've read the entire manuscript. Those sorts of questions have been running through your head. The second time I read it again, but I actually start with the results. Why? Well, no manuscript can be written without some results or some data that you want to discuss to prove some kind, or not prove necessarily, but to illustrate some kind of point. So I start with the results, then I go and find the aim and objectives that is usually at the end of the introduction. Maybe it's a research question or something like that. And I read their abstract and the conclusion. And I try to see whether the results speak to what the aim of the study or the manuscript is, and whether the results align with the objectives and how those are drawn together, of course, very succinctly in the results and conclusions, or results, discussion, and conclusions of the abstract, and in the final conclusions of the paper. If, for example, a statement is made in the conclusions that just comes out of the blue, which clearly was based on literature and not on the findings of the study, and it's almost said to be their own results, there's a disjuncture somewhere. And the thread is not flowing through the report. And I start to make more detailed notes, either on paper or on a document on my computer. And then third of all, I start my report file, or wherever you plan to draft the review that you're going to put together. So at this point, we know, as editors, either you're going to ask for the reviewer to do it online, or you're going to ask them to do it online and include a report which they upload as a PDF or a Word document. And so the advice here is to ask or to suggest to the reviewer to do that offline. Go and have a look at what's required of them to answer if there's specific questions, or give them the reviewer report to download so that they can work offline, because as we know with load shedding, we can lose things online if we can't save as we go along. So by this stage, I really have a very good sense of what the manuscript is like. If it is a well-written and constructed manuscript, it makes the review much easier. Of course, if you're feeling extremely negative about the manuscript itself, it makes the reviewer's job that much more difficult. And of course, for you as editors, you're wanting to get as much out of your reviewers as possible to give guidance to the authors. And of course, this takes time of a reviewer. It's a lot that we ask of reviewers for editing, well, for reviewing manuscripts. So when it is a difficult manuscript that's been given to a reviewer, and the report is going to take a lot of time if it's going to be done well, this is where I often think that the incentives that journals are giving nowadays, whether it's a something % discount for access to a database or some other incentive, is a good idea. The structure of a report is different for every journal, but there needs to be some guidance, especially for early career researchers, if a separate Word document or PDF is required, in addition to the online form that's being requested, of how they should structure the report. So typically, it can either be free or according to your requirements of the journal, but this is a good model to follow. So usually I start with a quick summary of the manuscript so I can show that I've read it and I understand what they were trying to do, and my overall impression. And I usually try and say something positive and then flip to something that maybe, if there is, in the case of a manuscript that does need a big overhaul, the overarching problematic area of the manuscript. And there's the point about if the journal requires comments online, put them in a Word document so that you don't lose them. The second point is, the second part of the report is really the major and minor issues. And I usually do that by section. And I would be specific by saying page, line, and paragraph and line, something like that. This is where it can be very difficult for reviewers if there's no numbering on a page. To have to sit and count lines can be very frustrating. So it is appreciated by reviewers when the journal requires some form of page and line numbering that can help one to put that review report together. And then the last bit is just any other points that you might have for the authors. And I don't usually use that. I usually have the red and the yellow sections of my reports. Here's another example for the format of a peer review report. I won't go through this in detail. It's very similar to what I just said. It is important to note, and early career researchers may not know this, is that there is a place where you speak about things just to the editor or the associate editor, and there's a place where you're going to give comments to authors. And to bear in mind some of the things I'm going to mention in a minute, what you do and don't put in those places. So this is an example of a report I would do: the title of the manuscript, the reviewer's comments dates, my general ones, and then the specific ones. It's important that we let reviewers know that they can give positive feedback. It's not just about pulling the manuscript apart. In fact, positive feedback is good. And then the constructive feedback for amendment can be both broad comments and it can be very specific. One of the things that I've learned to do, rather than saying repeatedly over and over when you've asked for something, a general comment that you then say, please apply this change throughout. For example, if I've asked for a change to be made in the results, at the beginning of the discussion, I would say something like, please make sure that whatever has been amended in the results feeds through and talks into the discussion, because if things have been updated and a model is rerun, and there's new findings, you must make sure that that changes in the discussion. It's a simple thing to say, but some authors, especially if we flip to the authors, the early career researchers trying to get their work published, this is something that they don't always think about. They just make the changes that are stated by the reviewer. And if it's just something in results, they don't think, oh, I need to change that in my discussion. There's really no general length of a review report. I've written ones that are a page and others that might be 5 or more. But I think as a reviewer, we should try and be as concise as possible. Some do's and don'ts for reviewers, and this is something that you may want to include on your website too. Not only just related to the policies that you have, which we'll look at in the next slide, I think, but just also in general for someone who's reviewing for the very first time or an inexperienced reviewer who's only done it a few times. Don't use expletives or offensive language as much as sometimes you may want to. Don't be self-promoting of your own references. That is something that's my own personal opinion, but I don't think it's an honorable way of behaving in this process. Never attack the authors, so always write with very constructive criticism. Do give concrete steps for how to improve the manuscript. If you just make a passing comment that is very general, it doesn't help the authors, and that's what you're trying to do. Don't disclose your identity in the report as a reviewer. It is not what the reviewer's job to be the copy editor. In fact, that's, I know, is a useless report for you as an editor if you just get someone who's done a spell check and not actually critique the science in the manuscript. And do imagine, as the reviewer, you are getting this review for one of your own manuscripts. So what would you like to get feedback on? And bear that in mind as you write one. You know all about these as editors, but I think it's important to make it very clear on your website, and if you don't already, what type of review process the reviewer is facing themselves to. It's becoming more and more open peer review, where your review comments are either made available with the final report to the authors with your name. Sometimes this is posted online. You have to check a box to say, yes, I do or don't want my name there. And I think it must be very clear for the reviewer to know, not to say that this is going to change their report, but it may encourage people, if they do know it's going to be posted online, to put that little bit more extra effort in to make sure that they do a proper job. So finally, why do I review manuscripts? And this might be something you want to include as an incentive for encouraging people to do reviews. I use reviewing manuscripts as a way to keep up with the literature in my fields of expertise. That's the main reason I review. It's so that I can read the latest science that's coming out in the areas that I am doing research, because I don't have time to just read for the sake of reading. So I use it for that purpose. Obviously, it's an obligation for my performance reviews at the MRC to review manuscripts. This is where it's become very useful when you get a little certificate from a journal to say that you have reviewed for them in the past year or something. I know early career researchers appreciate that and use that as evidence in their performance review, something for an editor of a journal to think about. Obviously, it helps the broader scientific community. And as a reviewer, you help editors and associate editors. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I am here, just struggling to find I'll start there we go. Just struggling to find my unmute and video button. So, Cardi, thank you very much. You were just within the time. I must just cancel that before it goes off and makes a dreadful racket. I should have known that it was Cardi and not Cardi. It's strange.
Okay,
I have friends who are Karen. I have friends who are Karen and friends who are Karen. And then I always call the Karens Karens and the Karens Karens, and they always correct me. So if I get it wrong, you can just correct me. It would not be
not a problem. It depends on where I am in the world. I'm a Cardi in Australia, New Zealand, and America, so it's not a problem.
Okay. I'm glad you had that last slide about why one should do a peer review, because I've often asked myself that question. Why should I do this? Since it's, but I mean, just quickly, because I know we're going to move on to the next. You didn't say anything about time. How long does it take you to do a review typically?
Yeah, so that depends on the size and of the manuscript, obviously, and also the journal. So if you're reviewing something for a nature journal and it's with the supplementary material, a 60-page endeavor, it will take me a good couple of hours to get through all of that material. Typically, a review for a journal paper that's when it's published, it's 8 to 10 pages. I guess the whole process is probably a day's worth of work, but I've got experience at doing it, so I can do it reasonably quickly because I know what I'm looking for. I think it would take an early career researcher longer than that, especially if they want to cross-check things, which we encourage people to do.
That's amazing. That's very dedicated. Okay, so let's move on because we can have our next speaker. Thank you so much. And just if you don't mind, just stay around so that you can answer questions in the.
Sure.
So our next speaker is Professor Bob Marsh. He's going to be talking to us about peer reviewer capacity building. Just a very brief bio for you. Professor Robert Marsh is a distinguished professor and executive head of family and emergency medicine and head of the Division for Family Medicine and Primary Care in the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at Stellenbosch University, which is just up the road from here. For being internationally known as the leading family medicine researcher in sub-Saharan Africa and being recognized as the lifetime honorary member of the World Organization of Family Doctors, and for his extraordinary contribution to medicine by the South African Medical Association. He is president of the South African Academy of Family Physicians. So then, without any further delay, Professor Bob Marsh, let me just check first of all whether I can see you. Can I hear you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Yes.
Your see whether
It's Mash, by the way, Mash, Professor Mash.
Did I not say Mash?
Oh, I think you were Marshall Mash, but it's Mash.
Oh, Marshmallow. Okay. No, I got that. I thought it was, maybe it's just a very bad South African accent. But in any case, Professor Mash, then we're going to check whether your slides are, have you got slides? Or not using
I do have some slides. Let me put them up here. I think you should be seeing them now.
Yeah, we are seeing them right now. Thank you so much. Okay, I'll switch off my.
All right. Yes, so welcome everybody, or greetings to everybody. I have actually no idea why I was asked to speak on this topic. I certainly don't feel like an expert on it. But I guess my role here is to hopefully stimulate some thinking and maybe some discussion that we can all benefit from at the end. So I'm the editor-in-chief of this journal, the African Journal of Primary Healthcare and Family Medicine, and I suppose I am largely drawing on my experience of trying to capacitate peer reviewers in this talk. So, why is this an issue? And I suppose all our disciplines are different, aren't they? But in my field of primary healthcare and family medicine, that we don't have a huge number of established researchers at the top of this pyramid. And so often you're asking people to review who are earlier in their career as researchers and therefore less experienced. And what that ends up, of course, is you often get a large variance between reviewers, with one accepting the paper and one, rejecting the paper sometimes. And of course, the risk is we have poor gatekeeping of the scientific standards of the work that is published. The feedback can then often be, as I said here, either irrelevant or very vague or unhelpful. And I also sometimes get irritated and demotivated authors, when they get comments and feedback from reviewers that they find frustrating. So I guess that's the issue, why we need to capacitate peer reviewers, in essence, to do a better job. And somebody, I think earlier, you were saying, well, why would anybody actually be a peer reviewer? In fact, when I told my wife earlier I was making this talk, she made exactly that comment. She said, well, why would anybody on earth do it? As I thought this was quite interesting to take the BCOM framework. So B stands for behavior. So if you want somebody to do a behavior or change their behavior, you can think about it in these three areas. So do they have the capability? Do they have the motivation? And what is the opportunity? What is the sort of environment like to support or not support this behavior? So I think as Karadi has already sort of mapped out, the capability, of course, is actually quite extensive in a way. I mean, you have to, of course, understand the journal requirements. You have to understand what your role is and some of the ethical issues around being a peer reviewer. Often you need to also be to some extent an expert in the particular topic that you're peer reviewing in. You have to be able to critically appraise the science, to look at, in a sense, the scholarship, the story, as Karadi was saying, and actually then be able to write and provide relevant constructive feedback, and to align that feedback actually with the recommendation. It's quite often I find that the reviewer's critique of the article and their final recommendation do not align. Maybe they want to avoid having to review it again, but that's also an issue. And then in terms of motivation, as we all know, this is usually a voluntary, almost always a voluntary activity, so you're not getting paid for it. And I think actually, Karadi, also you kind of alluded to why you do it, and it ticks quite a lot of these boxes. You may feel it as something of an obligation to the discipline and to other researchers. You know, you want your research to be peer reviewed, so you should also contribute. It may help you to develop your own research skills and own scholarship, can contribute, of course, nowadays to your own academic CV and career pathway, keep up to date. Some journals give CPD points, and some actually also incentivize you by giving you reduced article processing fees for the next year if you submit something to that journal, which is quite nice. And then the opportunity, of course, having enough time. I must say, Karadi, I think you're very, sounds like you're very diligent reviewer, taking an entire day to review. But that causes an issue for a lot of people. I think journals make the technological experience of reviewing, some of them make it very easy at the click of a button. Others make it something of a difficult and tortuous journey through the website. And as we've heard, for some people, it's actually part of your job description. Certainly with some of my own staff, I make it part of their work agreement. Of course, journals can choose to appreciate and incentivize to a lesser or greater degree their peer reviewers. And now a number of these organizations like ORCID and the Web of Science formally acknowledge and record peer reviewing, which is quite nice. So I thought about this, I suppose I don't know whether it really is a pipeline, but you know, how do we develop the ideal peer reviewer? You know, who do we select? How do we train or mentor people? How do we provide formative assessment and feedback to help them develop? So it's a few ideas on this. So, of course, selection, I'd be interested to see how people select. Often when we appoint reviewers, we think of people that we know in our own network who we know are established researchers. Sometimes, of course, we go to the author database. I've got a very large database in my journal, but often these people are very unknown quantities. Recently, actually, in the PhD FM journal, we put out an invitation for new peer reviewers, and people applied, and we actually then scrutinized their CVs. We actually accepted most of them, and some of them, though, we said, look, you look like a bit of a novice researcher, so we accept you if you agree to some mentoring. And then, of course, we have to try and match their expertise with the actual submissions. So some of the things that I've seen and we've tried around training of peer reviewers. So in the Prima Famid network, which is a sub-Saharan network of departments of family medicine and primary care, We've run e-workshops for the region on how to do peer reviewing and to try and improve our peer review base. We've also included workshops on how to do peer reviewing in national and regional conferences where potential peer reviewers would be gathered. And I've seen recently that there's actually now formal sort of training courses on offer. I think a lot of you will have known about Publons, which I think is more of an international group. They're offering peer review training and also help people to sort of list and kind of have their peer reviewing acknowledged formally. And I see just recently, this came to me, I think last week, from our own local FPD, School of Education, a short course in peer reviewing. So there are definitely some courses out there that we could link our peer reviewers to. And then slightly more coming into the mentoring space, one thing that I've actually tried, which is to actually integrate mentoring of peer review into formal higher education. So actually I did this in our Masters of Philosophy course, where people had to learn about critical appraisal, and then actually the final assignment was to peer review an actual article and then to receive feedback on your peer review as part of the module. And then, of course, some of the journals also are offering mentoring of peer reviewers through things like this is Mastering Your Fellowship in the South African Family Practice Journal, which is actually aimed at master's students who have to do critical appraisal as part of their course, but it's also, of course, equipping them with the skills needed to be peer reviewers at a later date. Another strategy that we've tried in the PHCFM journal is to actually offer all of our peer reviewers out there mentoring if they would like it. And what our editorial board agreed that each of them would mentor 1 or 2 people a year if they felt they were novice reviewers and they would like some feedback on what they were doing. Yes, and then formative assessment and feedback, and Karadi actually also sort of alluded to this. I mean, I think most of us actually score our reviewers. I know in my journal, they get scored behind the scenes. And actually, if you're scoring less than 3 out of 5, we probably won't use you again. But of course, the scoring is hidden, isn't it, from the reviewers? So it doesn't really help them in terms of their own development. I think the other strategy that we do, of course, is to give feedback to the reviewers after the review is complete on all of the reviews. So the reviewers will get an email with the feedback, and they can see each other's feedback. So in a way, there's a sort of implicit opportunity to benchmark yourself against the other reviewers and see whether you missed things or they had other interesting aspects that they picked up on. And I put here, yeah, query. I mean, obviously, in true formative assessment and feedback, you should actually probably get feedback on how you did and how you might have done things better if you were going to peer review again. And as has been alluded to, a number of journals, not my one, but a number of journals now make the peer review and the name of the peer reviewer public, publishes alongside the article. And of course, there is then, of course, the opportunity to get feedback from the readership of the journal or to commentary on even the peer review, which is quite scary, quite a scary thought, but it's possible. So that's really, I've probably been very quick, haven't I? Or fairly quick. That's really all I had to say. And maybe we can have some discussion. I'm sure there's a lot of wisdom in this group that could be shared beyond the few thoughts that I've had.
Perfect. That makes my job much easier. Thank you, Professor Marsh. I don't have to interrupt you. Let me turn off the timer. So long. There already is a question, and I'm sure I could fill up time if we need to, but There's a question here about, can the speaker say something about the value of reviewers being willing to re-review papers following revisions? So actually, this has happened to me in my experience as an editor or a sub-editor, where reviewers are not willing to re-review. And it's actually very disruptive because, as this person points out, the alternative reviewer then provides a different set of revisions, which are maybe contradictory to the initial reviews. And that's very frustrating for the author. So, I mean, that's not, I don't know whether there's a solution to that. Actually, it is a potential conflict, obviously, but maybe just, first of all, let me start, with Cardi. Maybe if you can start, and then Bob can also contribute.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think this is a really, really critical one. I've been on both sides of this. So I remember a particular journal where it went through 8 rounds of review, and maybe the paper was really bad, but it's a long time ago. I'm trying to save myself. But one of the problems was that it kept getting new reviewers. And so it wasn't that they were checking what you'd done and made the changes. They were now bringing in completely new things. And that happened, as I said, there were 8 iterations of that, until I wrote to the editor and I said, when is this going to stop? This is ridiculous. So, you can't force a reviewer to say they're going to re-review. We really need to create the culture of what I think somebody said earlier, the reciprocity of, we're doing reviews because we need the reviews ourselves as people who publish. And we understand the process, but it's not usually stated. Well, it is actually, in some journals, they ask, will you be willing to re-review this manuscript? And, even at that early stage, if somebody says no, I mean, maybe we should make it a decision then. I'm an associate editor for 3 journals. And if I had to see that, I think I'd go, oh, that's a little annoying, because I would like you at the very least to check that the authors have looked at your comments. So that's something to consider, but I don't think that there's an easy solution to force reviewers to re-review.
Okay, Professor Marsh?
Well, yes, I agree, of course. I mean, the ideal situation is that the same reviewers review the manuscript once it's been revised, if the original decision, of course, was resubmit for review. Now, I have come across an assistant editor who seemed to sort of send every manuscript back to the reviewers for another opinion, even if it was minor revisions, which, and I think that's problematic. So I think we really have to, the editors must do their job, some of those things, and make a decision. But if it is resubmit for review, then that is the expectation, and I guess it needs to be also explicit to reviewers that if that's the decision, then we really are expecting you to look at it again. Of course, as you say, you can't obligate or force people to do that, but it is a sort of an expectation. And as I say, I have a sneaking suspicion that that's why some reviewers, they kind of tell you this thing needs major revisions, then they tick the thing that says minor revisions, because they want to avoid having to look at it again. Yeah, I don't really have any magic solution to this. The other thing that we do actually is we flag that reviewer on the database if we know that the review is coming back to them, so that we also we try not to then allocate them to another submission, so that they've got 2 on the go, as it were, at the same time. Maybe others have got some wisdom on this.
Okay, there was a question here, actually a comment. No, there was a question about paying reviewers. So Susan Feltzman, do you think by paying reviewers to review it will alleviate the problem to get hold of reviewers? And then is already been quite a considerable amount of chat or comments on the chat saying, Carity, I see that, Carity, yeah, correct. You've said, I don't think paying reviewers should ever be an option at a journal scale. I happened last week to see Professor Daya Pillay, and he mentioned a book that's just been published by a whole bunch of local academics, including, I think it's edited by Jonathan Jansen, and it's called Becoming a Scholar. So this is not a commercial for their book, but it is open access and you can download it. And it has a whole section by Jonathan Jansen on academic duty. So is there not a broader discussion in a way about, let's not call it duty, let's call it academic citizenship, that somehow over time we've lost this notion of academic citizenship? What is the role of a public intellectual? What does it mean? What does academic citizenship mean? And who engages in that debate and keeps it alive and kind of perpetuates it? Because my experience of being a sub-editor is that it's increasingly difficult to get reviewers. People are busy. Reciprocity is important. You know, what goes around comes around, but whatever, what it seems to be that increasingly what goes around doesn't come around at the end. And so there's a kind of what is the expression? Something about falling rate of return. So the question then is about academic citizenship. What does academic citizenship mean in your terms, and how should we strengthen this culture of academic citizenship? Oh, okay, let's go.
I mean, the one comment, I kind of agree with you. Yeah, I mean, it does feel like it's part of being an academic to be a peer reviewer. I mean, I was interested that Kariti has it even in her job description. I must remember that at the MRC. But I mean, because for the majority of my peer reviewers, they're clinicians. You know, they're doing this on top of everything else. They're sort of clinician scientists, I suppose. But the one thing I was going to say was that I recently listened to this podcast on the business of publishing and how the profit margins for the publishers can be as high as 40%. And part of it, of course, is because we do everything for free. So, one kind of interrogate this also from a business point of view to say, are we actually just giving the publishers a huge profit? Because we, as academics, we just do everything for free for them. Well, I don't know the answer to that, but that is more of a provocative kind of the other side, maybe, of the conversation.
I thought it was 400%, not 40%.
Well, in this podcast, they said the profit margin was around 36 to 40%. I don't know whether it still is, but
okay. So, Kariti, I don't know, did you have something else you wanted to say on that, about this issue of paying reviewers and academic citizenship?
Yeah, not really, because I think it's a challenging topic. At the end of the day, other than putting it in somebody's job description, which it is the case for me and everybody on my team. In fact, everyone at the MRC who's in the science track has that. I can't see how you force people to do it. And I think we've got to go back to you want it done for your own work. So, and it actually helps you learn how to write manuscripts by reading others. And I just want to clarify a point. So the longest a review will take me is a day. I don't know if anyone has ever reviewed for the journal, New England Journal of Medicine. Those papers are whoppers. And so that's an extreme event. In the case of a very small paper, it may be a couple of hours. And of course, it's the reading, and then you want to look something up, and is there plagiarism? Somewhere you read something, it doesn't make sense, or it seems out of place in the manuscript. And then you've still got to write the actual report. So it's a couple of hours, but yeah, the big journals where you're doing a really big review, then it can take a whole day. And the other thing that you raised, which I thought was really, really important, is the aspect of people agreeing to review a manuscript outside their field of expertise or out of their depth. And I've noticed nowadays several journals have the question to the reviewer, Are you able to assess the methodologies or the statistics of this manuscript? And you have to say yes or no. And I've had reviewers, in fact, as in the associate editor role, come back to me say, well, I can understand this aspect and this aspect of the manuscript, but I'm not familiar with this methodology, or I don't understand this technical part that they're bringing in. And so that's really useful, I think, information perhaps for editors to bear in mind that, I mean, the flip side is reviewers mustn't take on manuscripts that are out of their depth and out of their field. But for editors to also bear in mind that sometimes those cursory reviews that you receive are just because people are out of their area of expertise.
So then just following up on the point that I was making about the number of reviewers, people who are prepared to review, and secondly, the quality. Has there been any trend in that respect from either of you?
I've seen some poorer quality reports since COVID. Yeah, and a great reduction in people who agree to review.
To review.
Yeah, since the pandemic, it's just been very difficult to get reviewers.
And what if there was mass action by academic reviewers? Just, we're not doing this anymore, sorry.
It's a good point.
Okay, let's ask, is there anyone in the audience who wants to join this three-way conversation?
I see there's some very interesting points being made in the chat, and maybe people should actually sort of, you know, open their microphones and join in. I mean, particularly, I think the incentives, there was, for me, that's also, I think, important. You know, so you may not need to pay a peer reviewer, but if, as I said, for example, one thing would be if you review for this journal, then maybe over the next year, if you submit something, you know, you would get some reduction in the APCs. So I think those sort of incentives are quite valuable.
Are useful, yeah.
I think the British Medical Journal does that, doesn't it? And some of that body, yeah. But
in most cases, I mean, if I'm an academic at the University of Pretoria, I don't pay the journal fees. So the fact that I can get 6 months free subscription is meaningless, which is what energy research and social science, you know, by the way, you can get 6 months free subscription. Yeah, it's not a free lunch.
Well, I think, yeah, I think that the reduction of article processing charges, particularly, so at the MRC, we are obligated, it's mandatory to submit articles only to open access journals. So we have to pay. And so when you have done a review and you get a discount for the next time you submit to that journal, it does help. And maybe that is one of the models that will be useful going forward.
Do you ever get a reviewer saying, I will only review open access journals or open access publications? No.
I haven't experienced that.
I mean, my one is an open access publication, but I suppose I would never ask that question.
Because that would be something that I, you know, that's the kind of position I might take in the future. I don't know.
Chip in, yeah. So I mean, I'm with South African Computer Journal, which is open access, and we have a 6,000 Rand APC. But I'm also an associate editor for a massive Elsevier journal, where we get the huge numbers of engineering applications of artificial intelligence, and they, you know, I don't know what they get, but we are a huge team of associate editors, and we all taking care of 16 articles at a time. As you make decisions, you get a new one, and so it goes. But there I've had people, reviewers refusing to review for Elsevier. They say because of the policies of the publisher, they've made a decision to not ever review for this publisher, for journals of that publisher. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much, Catherine. And let us ask, is it Blanche Pretorius? If you are here, maybe just comment about this reviewer certificates, and also if you can maybe give us your opinion on whether Publons, I think it's Publons, which recognizes peer review, and allows you to publish work.
There's a number now. I mean, there's ORCID. I don't know if you, how do you say ORCID? Is it ORCID? ORCID?
ORCID.
That you can link, you know, to journals, and then your peer reviews automatically get listed there. The Web of Science apparently also has a similar service now. And I think Publons, you know, they were also providing that, weren't they, as a sort of a database where you could could list all of your peer reviews.
Does anyone pay any attention to those?
I think it not a huge amount, but I think it does. It does. You know, if you're applying for academic promotion, or you know, it can be another section, can't it, in your CV to show that you are recognized and that you have contributed. And I guess the more prestigious the journals, the more it looks good. So yeah, I think that it's sort of, I think it can contribute something, but it's not probably the major.
All right. So I'm going to go to Labby Ramrathan, sorry. But just before I do that, I was hoping Blanche Pretorius would come online. Blanche, are you there? No.
Yes,
No.
I'm here.
Ah, brilliant. Okay. So Blanche, just a comment on you said at SAJOT, we send reviewer certificates and award CPD points to reviewers. Obviously, points is specific to certain disciplines, but the reviewer certificates, I mean, are these things that people it gives them, you know, that they're proud of them, that they're important to them? How are these received?
Yes, they're very well received. We've actually, when we are a few days late in sending them, we actually get the request to could we please have our certificate. So I think it is something that young researchers include in their CVs or for promotion purposes. So so when we introduced this, it really was received very well by our reviewers, and I think it to a certain extent does sort of incentivize the whole thing.
Okay,
yeah, there are certain professions that are obligated to have a certain number of CPD points per year. You know, so in medicine, you have to have, I think it's 50 CEUs per year. So if you can get a few from peer reviewing, especially if they're ethics points, you know, that would go down well. Yeah.
Yeah, that goes hand in hand with the certificates or the CEUs that are awarded.
I was amused when Carity put up her list of hints or things that you need to do, and the first one was read the manuscript. You
think that would be obvious, but
that should be
Seriously.
You should have a checkbox in which, you know, like you have to tick, have you read the manuscript?
Well, sometimes it's, you know, sometimes it's very clear, as editors you'll know, when you get a review report, the person hasn't read it properly because they're asking for something that's provided on line 27. And so the person has just skipped and read and done a cursory read. And that's not what we want. So, you know, that's the point I was making.
I think we've all had reviews like that where, you know, 5 lines and the person obviously hasn't reviewed it. And the only thing they've said is, please use my articles, which are nothing to do with the subject of your topic. Can I just interrupt you and go to Labby quickly? I've been sorry, Professor Marsh.
Sorry, just to add to the discussion, I think, Carity, the reading of the article is really substantive, because I have seen people, you know, just comment on things that are so glaringly in the article and so forth. But the point that I want to make about incentivizing is that if we actually move into the monetary aspect of incentivizing, that's going to be a disaster to us as journal editors and so forth, because at the moment it's extremely costly to publish articles. Increasingly, institutions are not contributing substantially or sufficiently to allow authors to publish, and any more expenses into the cost of publishing will certainly, really create problems financially for the journal. And so we have to guard against that. And I think we're really thinking very strongly about it. I like the other things about certifications. In fact, my institution at UKZN, reviewing journal articles for things and being part of scholarship circles or things are part of the requirements for consideration for professorship or associate professorship. So I think those are some of the things that we need to think about, but we really need to stay away from monetary values to incentivizing.
I'd like to add that South African Journal of Science has a really nice initiative that I didn't know about their Peer Reviewer of the Year award, which I think is pretty cool.
Do they give you a gold watch? Or?
No, they give you a very kind token of appreciation. Yeah.
Sounds amazing. All right, so Professor Marsh, back to you.
No, I just think, yeah, because the topic of my talk was really around not so much incentivizing people to do it, but capacitating them to do it. So if they agree to do it, how do we make sure that they do it well? And I suppose I'm thinking that we're not very proactive, are we, in terms of sort of saying, so, do you feel like you need some mentoring? Do you feel that you're an experienced, researcher and you're absolutely fine? And I think in my world, a lot of the reviewers would say, I actually do feel like I'm kind of doing this. I want to do it, but I would value some support, some mentoring and some feedback, and did I do a good review? I don't know, nobody ever told me. So I just wonder whether we shouldn't be actually thinking about offering people mentoring, helping them to identify, if they feel like they would like it, and actually giving feedback. I mean, as I say, we kind of very subtly kind of show them, well, this is what the other reviewer said, hoping that they'll look at it and see, well, actually my review wasn't very good, was it? But maybe we should be doing it more proactively to say, would you actually like some feedback on the quality of your review from the perspective of the editor?
I see there's a question, sorry to interrupt. I see there's a question from Susan Peltzman. I'm going to come to you in a second, but I've got a question for both of you then, which kind of builds on that, which is, I'd love to get my hands on the database of a rating of reviewers and do some statistics on that to see whether you could predict who's going to be a good and a bad reviewer. In other words, what are the characteristics that you might use in identifying good reviewers? Obviously, there would be an assumption there.
We recently had a conversation about our rating scale with my team of editors, because what was interesting was because the publishers had put some sort of anchors against the sort of 5-point scale, which were mostly related to the speed with which people did the review, but not to the actual quality of the review. So if you did it very quickly and came back within the time frame, then you really got a good gold star.
You got a 5.
But we were sort of like arguing that it needs to actually look at the quality of the review as well, or in fact maybe primarily, because and I think as Kennedy said, I mean, if somebody is just giving copy editing or such vague wishy-washy statements, nobody gets no constructive feedback, all these things, you should score really low. And if you don't get any capacitating, you won't be used again. Which also brings us back to the fact that, should we then just abandon those people, or should we actually try and help them improve?
Okay.
Well, I guess that comes down to whether they want to or not.
Exactly.
They want to be engaged. I know in one of the journals that I'm an associate editor for, when I get a review report, there are 3 questions I get asked, and I can't remember the third one, but one is, was it on time? Was it timely? And then was it sufficiently detailed? And then was it of value? So I guess that this sort of trying to unpack, did it come at the time you needed it? Did it have information in it that was useful, and was it of a quality that could actually then be sent out to an author? Because that's the other thing, you can get a review report which is such a mess that you have to spend time trying to fix it before you send it out. And that, I mean, that there's a little bit there I'm unsure of, you know, how much do you fiddle with a review report? But I mean, you clearly can't, if somebody's new at it and they've got expletives or other things, you've got to look at them. You know, there is an onus on you to look at the report. So
Okay.
yeah, I just
All
think
right,
that some level of checking, and but the flip of it is should we? So the other thing is how we also get a thing that says how many reviews has this person done in the last 6 months for the journal. And often if it's 0, I won't ask that person because, or I think it's 6 months, I think it's a year. I think it's a year in the last year. That also helps because then, you know, there's probably very little likelihood of them saying yes.
I was thinking of other indicators, things like, you know, has this person...
Folks, we have to start breaking lunch.
So, sorry, Professor Tomaselli. I'm not sure if Susanne Felsman has got a quick comment just before you cut us off. Susanne.
David, this is a loaded comment actually, and I'm just scared to put it out there. It was asked by somebody else on this group, but I think the question actually got a bit swallowed by all the fantastic comments we got, and that's about double-blind review. Some inputs there, so you're welcome to park that question if you want to, but I really thought that is a good question. We get a lot of comments, you know, why double, why blind, etc. So it's up to you. Welcome.
But no, I don't think we can enter into that territory. So I think I'm going to hand back to Professor Tomaselli, but thank you for that. Susanne Felsman will take written contributions on the subject of double blind versus single blind versus open peer review over the next 5 days. Okay, thank you so much. And this has been a fun session. Professor Tomaselli, back to you.